Does anyone really know how much 90% silver still exists today? Well, that was the question that some of my viewers had from the last video, and I thought I would address that question because it's very important to those of us who are investing in 90% silver for some very obvious reasons. The higher in demand a product is, and especially if it begins to have a dwindling supply, the more the potential is for an advancement in price. And so if we're investing in 90% silver and the supply continues to dwindle, well, that's good news for us as long as the demand remains high. And so I wanted to look at that today. I appreciate the viewers who sent that question in, by the way. I think it's a very pertinent one to the market that we have right now. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rick Bloodworth. This is the Common Sense Christian Financial Channel. I've been investing in silver since 1981 and in 90% silver, probably since the year 1995. And so it's something that I have had some experience in. I've made a lot of mistakes in it, but I've had a few things that I've discovered work fairly well in that. And so I've been discussing that in the last several videos. Today I want to talk specifically about the supply. I came across a video by a gentleman who calls his YouTube channel the Smart Silver Stacker. He put this video out a little over a year ago in September of 2024, and he talked about the existing supply of 90% silver. And he started in 1892. That was the year that barber coinage began. And the reason he did that is because most of the coinage made before that time is mainly considered numismatic, and people invest in that for a far different reason. They're willing to pay a premium that's far in excess of just the silver content. But in 1892, starting with the barber silver coinage, we're starting to look at an area of the silver investment market that is primarily interested in the silver content. And while there's a number of coins that were minted after 1892 that have a very strong numismatic value, this really is a very proper way to start. Starting in 1892, he looked at the total mintage of the U.S. 90% coins that were under $1. In other words, the half dollars, the quarters, and the dimes. And he looked at the total mintage of that until 1964, the last year that silver coins were made to be placed into circulation. And here's what he found. There were 9,796,000,000 dimes minted during that time, 4,261,000,000 quarters minted during that time, and 1,536,000,000 90% silver halves minted in that time, for a total of about $980 million face of dimes, 1.065 billion face value of quarters minted during that time, and $768 million of face value of 90% silver half dollars minted, for a total of about $2.8 billion of face value of 90% silver. Well, there was certainly never that much all in circulation at one time. A lot of that had been taken out by the U.S. Mint itself and melted down when the coins became wore out. But again, it's a good place to start. We know that there was a maximum of 2.8 billion face value of 90% silver coins minted. Well, what's happened to that? In 1979 and 1980, the Hunt brothers invested in tons, literally, of silver, and they drove the price progressively higher until the point in 1979 where they actually started melting our 90% coinage. From 1967 to 1969, and certainly prior to 1965, it was illegal to melt 90% silver coins. But during the 70s, they relaxed those laws. It was no longer illegal to start melting the 90% coins since they were no longer intended for circulation. And so a lot of people took advantage of that. And as the price went up, a lot more people took advantage of that. PCGS.com has an article that talks about an interview that was done with a New York coin dealer by the name of Joel Cohen. And he was a huge seller of 90% silver. As a matter of fact, he estimated during that time, during 1979 to 1980, that he alone had sold more than $400 million worth of silver. And he said the vast majority of that was 90% silver. And he said that was just the common practice during that time. Nobody was really that forward thinking. That was just the business practice. But he estimated that the total market during that melting consumed about 3/4 of the existing 90% silver. And so that's important. If there were 2.8 billion face value worth of 90% coins and 3/4 was melted, that's only leaving about $700 million of face value of 90%. Well, that's just the 90% silver of the half dollars, quarters, and dimes. There was also 90% silver dollars that were minted during that time. The most common were the Morgan silver dollars and the Peace silver dollars. And so I wanted to look at the mintage of those and talk about that just for a moment as well, so we can kind of get a better grasp of how much might be remaining for people like you and I to invest in. The Morgan silver dollar minted from 1878 to 1904, and then they ceased production of that for a total mintage of 572 million silver dollars. Well, later in 1921, they had mintage of Morgan silver dollars again for 1 year, but it was suspended for the 17-year period in between. And in fact, during that time, World War I was fought. And there was a shortage of silver in the British Empire, so much so that they went to the United States and asked them if they didn't have any silver that they could purchase so that their currency could be backed by silver. And the U.S. did. They were more than glad to. They had a glut of silver dollars that had been sitting in the Treasury, as well as numerous banks around the country. And so the Pittman Act was passed by Congress that allowed for up to 350 million silver dollars to be melted during that time. And in fact, they eventually melted 270 million silver dollars. So they had a total population or total mintage between 1878 and 1904 of 572 million. They melted 270 million, so obviously the math's fairly simple. It just left about 300 million Morgan silver dollars. Well, in 1921, they started the mintage up again. They minted about 86 million Morgan silver dollars that year and then stopped the Morgan mintage, and they replaced it with the Peace dollar mintage. And they minted about 1 million 1921 Peace dollars that year. And then through 1935, they minted another 190 million Peace dollars. And so now we have a total population of about 575 million silver dollars. Well, 1941, there's another war going on, and the Silver Act of 1941 did essentially the same thing that the Pittman Act did, just on a smaller basis, and they melted, based on that act, a total of 53 million U.S. silver dollars, primarily Morgan and Peace silver dollars. And so now there's just an available population at maximum of about 522 million silver dollars between the Morgan and the Peace. So what do we have? We have about 522 million at the most silver dollars available that were minted between 1878 and 1935 that have yet to be melted. And then, of course, 1979 comes along, and they were certainly melting those silver dollars just like they were melting the silver coinage that was under $1 in face value. We're not sure exactly how much of that was melted, but I think it's reasonable to surmise that at least half of that was melted. And so we've got maybe remaining at that point about 260 million silver dollars, and we're a total of about $200 million of actual silver weight silver dollars, another 500 million ounces in actual silver weight from the $700 million of face value of silver coins. And so maximum of about 700 million ounces. Now, that's 1979. Since that point, we've had a continual meltage, just kind of in drips and drabs, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but nothing really significant until this year. And as most of you know, this year, starting about 2 or 3 months ago, the coin dealers were so overwhelmed with their 90%, whether it was half dollars, quarters, and dimes, or whether it was even silver dollars, that they could no longer market them in-house, and their wholesalers actually stopped taking them as well. And so the coin dealers, if they wanted to continue to do business, had to send that to the refineries. Now, obviously they could have lowered their prices and sold it to the public at a cheaper price, but how many of us want to take a lower price for our product? They're the same way. And so since they're in it for business, that's what they did. There's been a lot of 90% melted this year as well. How much? I don't think anybody really knows, but we're starting off with a maximum of about 700 million face value of the half dollars, quarters, and dimes, and then another maybe 260 million of silver dollars, the Morgan and the piece. So we didn't have a lot to begin with, and that population is shrinking more and more. Well, the point of all this is that we've probably got about a quarter or less of our original mintages of our 90% coinage. It's a very popular part of the investment world. Now, I realize it's fallen a little bit out of favor recently because the refineries don't want to take it. They can refine 0.999 silver much cheaper, and in fact that's what they're doing. They're taking 1 ounce silver rounds and bars of various weights and even sovereigns, and they're turning them into 1,000-ounce COMEX bars to be marketed through the COMEX to the various commercial and industrial buyers. So that's why they've stopped taking the 90%. It takes a certain chemical to be able to do that. It takes a certain amount of time. And so they've stopped doing that, as well as the other alloyed or fabricated silver, such as your grandma's tea set. And so that's slowed down for a while. And because of that, the prices that you can receive from your dealer have come down somewhat. But still, when you think about it, you can still get about $45 an ounce for your 90% silver, and that's not bad. I did have several people wonder where you can get that amount from. I noticed just this morning, Vermilion Enterprises, Brian Vermilion in Spring Hill, Florida, was advertising that he was buying 90% for about $5 under spot, but he was also selling it for about $3.50 under spot. And so that's a pretty good price. Either way, it's not a very big spread. There still are some dealers who are buying and selling 90%, and they're doing so in some pretty large increments. And so we can still have an outlet if we're wanting to sell. We have a place to go and purchase if we're wanting to buy below spot. And a lot of people are sensing an opportunity at that. And part of the reason is because there is, in fact, much less 90% silver today than there was back in 1965 when they stopped producing it. As a matter of fact, it's significantly much less. If it remains in demand, and I suspect it will, well, that can be some opportunities for the future. And there's a lot of people who share that idea. We may be wrong on it, but in the past, it hasn't been a bad strategy to buy when one sector is low and then sell it back as it comes back into favor. That's the reason I believe it's so important to answer questions like that. It's an excellent question, by the way. How much 90% do we have remaining? Probably less than 25%, and it's getting less and less as the days go by. There's one other factor within the 90% market that I think that should be mentioned, and that is that a good part of the remaining 90% is actually numismatic in value, or it has collector value. In other words, you're not going to go out and sell your 1893 S Morgan silver dollar that's worth thousands of dollars for the $40 worth of silver content that it contains. So that is in strong hands. It's not going to be melted unless it's done accidentally. There are many, many coins like that, and people, collectors, like to have those types of coins for their collections. And one thing, if you're a collector, you know you're not going to go out and sell that 90% silver for its silver content. You're going to hang on to it and either keep it for your own collection or you'll sell it to another collector who recognizes its value. So again, the 90%, while it's perhaps not as popular as it was just a few months ago, it still has quite a demand from a pretty significant part of the silver investment people. And so I think it is, at least for now, an opportunity if you're wanting to dip your toe into the silver market and maybe get it at a little bit below spot at that. Now, one more comment about that. If you're buying silver right now at historic nominal highs, it's probably prudent just to buy a little bit at a time, to dollar cost average it in over a period of several months or even years. Now, a lot of people don't like to do that. They know it's going up and they want to put all their money into it now. That's certainly up to you. This is not financial advice. This is just maybe a word of caution from somebody who has, in fact, invested at some pretty high parts of the market through the years and then watched it go down. Sometimes when the market goes up, it's not a bad idea to take a little profit off the table and then start buying it back if it goes down. And if it doesn't, well, the rest of your holdings are going up, so you should still be happy. I hope this video has been of interest to you. I hope it's been of help to you. I certainly appreciate your watching today. If you have comments, please share them. I always try to read them, and I always try to get back to them in as timely of a manner as I possibly can. But again, I appreciate your watching today. I hope we'll see you again next time. God bless.